Hey, my name is Daniel Catalanella, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about Latin verbs. Specifically, we're going to talk about the four principal parts of the Latin verb, and then we're going to move on briefly to talk about participles. Now, these four principal parts, at least the first three parts, that's probably going to be a review for you guys if you've already taken a couple years of Latin, but it's always good to review. And we're going to use a pretty simple second conjugation verb, somewhat common, dokeo, dokere, meaning to teach. And now I have these four principal parts written out here. This is what you're going to see anytime you look up a Latin verb in a dictionary. It's going to be those four principal parts that are listed. And it's crucial to be familiar with these four principal parts and to know what their functions are, because from these four parts, all of the tenses and verbal forms are derived. So ideally, you'd be able to know, anytime you see a Latin verb, you should be able to know the four principal parts as well. If not, at least the first two parts. Here we have dokeo. The first principal part is already conjugated into present active indicative form. So dokeo means I teach. Whereas the second principal part, that's the infinitive. So that means to teach. And the second principal part is important because it'll tell us which conjugation it is. Clearly, this has a long E in the ending, so it's a second conjugation verb. And the infinitive, that's the version of the verb that's not conjugated. It literally means to teach. So, dokeo, we have these endings here for present, imperfect, and future tense. Those are the three main tenses that you're probably already pretty familiar with that are going to be formed from this second principal part, the infinitive. We can picture knocking off this RE ending, so you just have the doke with the long E. From there, you can form the present, imperfect, and future tense. So you're probably already familiar with these endings, or you probably should be, but just to go through a couple, we have our first person, second person, and third person, singular, and plural down here. So present tense, we have dokeo, dokes, doket, I teach, you teach, he or she teaches, and so on. And then we have imperfect, doke bom, doke bos, doke bot, I was teaching, you were teaching, he or she was teaching. And then of course future tense, dokebo, doke bis, doke bit, and so on. These are the endings in red. And like I said, it's important to know what conjugation the verb is. This is second conjugation, because that's going to be the vowel that's in the ending. The endings after the vowel, that's pretty uniform across the board for all the conjugations. But you're going to need to know which conjugation it is so that you can have that long E in there, in this case, since it's a second conjugation verb. Now, the first principal part that's already been conjugated to its first person present active indicative form. But the infinitive, that's the form of it that, like I said, hasn't been conjugated yet. But that also gets used in sentences as well. Can anybody think of a way that you might use an infinitive in a sentence?
I was thinking when you first said it in English, the only things I could think of would be to, like, in English you might say, I taught you to teach, or something like that. Yeah.
Right. So if it's being used in tandem with another verb, that's where you might see an infinitive used, as in this example I have here, magister docere amat, meaning the teacher loves to teach. So here we have a conjugated verb, amat, from amo, amare, meaning to love, and docere, that's in its infinitive form, that's the second principal part. So here, the infinitive is being used as the object of the verb amat.
And that's a little bit different, I guess, than English or maybe some other languages. The infinitive is coming before the verb.
Right.
The direct object is before the verb.
Right. Latin syntax is kind of unique compared to English. Syntax, I mean word order, of course. English, the word order is usually pretty exact. It needs to be a certain way, but in Latin syntax, you have a lot more flexibility. So, right, the word order is not always going to reflect exactly how we would translate it or render it into English.
And that's even different than the only language that I've really taken a lot of time in French. That I think that infinitive would come actually after. So that's different.
Sure, yeah. You're often, one thing you can usually count on is that the main verb that's functioning in a sentence will often be the last word you see in the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we read this verb first, and then the infinitive will come into play since it's functioning as the object of that verb. But moving right along, just to review, we have these first three tenses all formed from that second principal part. But once we move to the third principal part, that's actually the perfect system. So dokui is actually conjugated into first person active indicative, perfect tense. And just to review the perfect tense in case you guys don't quite remember, it can kind of thought of as being somewhat similar to the imperfect tense, that it's a past tense, but whereas in the imperfect, I was teaching, that's an action that's still ongoing in the past potentially. Whereas the perfect tense is something that has been completed in the past. So it'll usually be translated in English as having that ED ending. Or for something like teach, it's I have taught or I taught, you have taught, he or she has taught. And so we have our perfect endings right here, and they're all derived from that third principal part. And I won't talk about too much, but also we have pluperfect and future perfect being formed from that third principal part as well. I had taught or I will have taught. It's strange to think about a future perfect tense, but that's an action that will have been completed in the future.
So maybe with the imperfect tense as something that is ongoing, could you give us an example, like maybe when I was young, maybe something like that is where you could use imperfect?
Well, often it's translated, the verb will have that ing ending. I was teaching, whereas the perfect, it's gonna have a different, I taught, or a different word. I loved to eat this dish. I walked to the supermarket. If it's in perfect tense, that's how it's translated. So moving right along to the fourth principal part, this is where things get a little more complicated, and this might not be review for you guys. It's something you would probably learn in upper level Latin, but the participle is very important. Or I just kind of gave away what the fourth principal part is, but it is it's the perfect passive participle. And in case you guys don't remember what a participle is, it's functioning a little different than the other verbs we were talking about. Those are verbs that are actually being performed. Whereas a participle, it's derived from a verb, verbal form, but it's actually functioning as something that's modifying something in a sentence. So what does that sound like? What part of speech do you think that is functioning as in a sentence if it's modifying something?
Well, if it's going to modify, it's going to, if it's modifying nouns, it's adjectives. If it's modifying verbs, it's adverbs.
In this case, you were right with at first, it's functioning as an adjective. So it's from this fourth principal part of a verb, but it's functioning in a sentence as an adjective. That's the definition of a participle. It's a verbal adjective. So we have doctus It has these personal endings, which means it needs to be declined according to the person, number, and case of the thing that it's modifying. So we have 4 different participles, 2 of which are drawn from this. And in this form, it's already in the perfect passive form. So I have this little chart here where we have active and passive, the 2 different voices that we're going to be looking at. And then we have present, perfect, and future tense. So like I said, this is the perfect passive tense. And the other verbs you're talking about were all in active voice. It's something that the person is performing. Whereas in the passive voice, it's something that is being done to the person that the verb is applying to. So, doctus that would translate to having been taught, or in a slightly less common way of saying it would be a learned person. Like I said, it's functioning as an adjective, it's describing something. So, in this example I have here, whereas doctus legere amat, that translates to, well, if we can break it down, we see whereas doctus, this is our subject here, the man, and then you can see these endings very clearly match, so that must mean this participle is modifying whereas. So the learned man, amat legere, loves to teach. So we have this conjugated verb for amat, like amo amare, and then legere is actually an infinitive, like the second principal part. So the learned man loves to teach. So we have a participle here, a regular conjugated third person present active indicative, and legere is the infinitive. So, yeah, it's functioning as an adjective there, it's modifying whereas. Now if we